Hey, it's so good to be with you guys this morning. I'm Jonathan, one of the pastors here on staff, and today is a special day. Today is Palm Sunday, yay! And we're starting a new series for a grand total of 7 days, and it's really good. We just finished up a series on James, talking about following God and even in the midst of trials, God being at work in that. And that really sets us up really well for talking about the events of Jesus' last week here on earth. And we're calling it For the Joy, which comes out of a passage in Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to look at it real quick before we jump into Palm Sunday, because this is really an incredible passage. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, the author says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and now he is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." Our key idea comes from verse 2, where Jesus, who's the author and perfecter, he starts salvation, he brings it here and now, but he's also the one who shapes it in our lives. He's the perfecter of it. He endured some incredible trial, some incredible pain, and it was for the joy that was set before him. So what does that mean? The context here in Hebrews 11, the chapter 4, the author has walked through a long chapter of naming faithful person after faithful person, saying these people have walked with God through incredible trial. And in light of that, you and me, as the people of God, can walk in faith with him. And he says we need to look at Jesus, who, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Now, when we talk about Jesus' death, when we talk about his final week, it's a really painful week. There's betrayal, there's sadness, there's torture, there's people abandoning Jesus, some really incredibly dark moments. And yet, the author of Hebrews says that Jesus endured for the joy that was set before him. So it's not a joy that's like super happy and giddy and like, yay, it's not flippant, but it's a deep-seated contentment in who God is and what he's doing and the redemptive work that he is accomplishing in this world. And he says he's despising the shame. And Jesus, we'll talk about this on Friday, he died poor, alone, abandoned, naked, tortured, and crucified. I mean, it's just a devastating, shameful experience. But he did it for the joy set before him. And that joy is a contentment that it's a deep-seated trust that God is doing redemptive work here and now. And he has his sights set on you and me, on the redemptive work he's doing in this world cosmically, but in our lives, in this little community out here at Quest, and individually in your stories. He's looked into these moments and he's creating new life in our lives. And that brings the joy that fuels Jesus' mission. So a couple key ideas. It's an incredible passage. We could spend more time here, but this is going to be our framework as we look to the events of Palm Sunday, as we look to Easter and Good Friday. So first, we see Jesus overcoming his trials by drawing from the joy of knowing the end results. He's not happy and giddy, but he has this assurance and hope that God is at work through him and in him. It's not just an emotion, but it's this steady trust in God in the midst of trials. And we just finished a series on James where we've talked a whole bunch about trials, and it's hard and it's not easy. But when James says, consider it pure joy when you encounter trials of various kinds, Jesus did this in an incredible way. That Jesus has walked through trials, and God was faithful to him, and he will be faithful to us in our trials. So, secondly, we also see that you and me, we can find strength as we journey through life's trials by looking to Jesus. So we are to run the race of endurance. It's not a sprint, a 100-meter dash. It's kind of a marathon. For a short while, I thought about almost becoming a long-distance runner. I almost thought about it. I liked running. It was fun, but the pace you set in life, the pace you set when you're running long distance, sometimes it feels a lot slower than you think. You're like, man, I got a long ways to go. But you can accomplish incredible things by setting a pace of knowing where you're going. And that's the life that you and me are walking. It's hard. There's trials. But God is at work in it, and we look to Jesus, who's going to be the source of our power. That's why we're going to spend these weeks talking about the pivotal moment in history, and Jesus' death and his victorious resurrection. So that's where we're going. Keep in mind this idea that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. That's going to help us kind of unpack these events with Palm Sunday and Good Friday and Easter. So as we talk about Palm Sunday, this is a story that some of us are really, really familiar with. Some of us, we might not be. But it really boils down to this idea of who is Jesus and what does he come to do, and does it matter? Who is he, and what happened, and why is it important? And so if you're here this morning and you're a committed follower of Jesus, or if you're here and you're like, I don't know what to believe, wherever you're at on your spiritual journey, your journey of faith and wrestling through the questions of life, I'm so glad that you are here. And I think it's so important for us to take these questions and then to say, who is Jesus, and why does it matter? Does it have any relevance for my life? And I think it does. But wherever you're at, we're so glad that you're here. And this comes to the forefront when we think about who Jesus is as he comes into Jerusalem at this final week of his life, and the events of Palm Sunday. And what we see, and what we'll see as we look at this passage, we'll see that Jesus is coming as a king. Who is Jesus? He's coming as a king. But he's not the king that people are expecting, and he's not necessarily the king that people want. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But Jesus is going to come as a king. So a little bit of historical context and background. This is the week of Passover, which is a famous, really important holiday, celebration, festival in the Jewish calendar. And every year they would have the celebration of Passover, and Jewish people from all over, and people who had converted to Judaism, would come to Jerusalem. They would journey a long time, and they would offer sacrifices, and they would get together, and they'd eat and pray. And it was all about looking back thousands of years to look at God's deliverance from the people of Israel from their slavery in Egypt. They looked and saw God bringing deliverance historically and helping his people and bringing them into a new place where they can experience life and human flourishing, and that there's this deliverance. But when they get together for Passover, they are looking back at that event and then looking for hope in the here and now. They're looking for that same deliverance in their present day. And this is where there's a lot of political and national undertones and aspects to the events of Jesus' life, and specifically his death, because there is Roman oppression here in Jerusalem especially, but in all this land, they were pushing their thumb more and more down on the communities. They were struggling. There was a lot of just... you knew who was in charge, you knew who was the oppressive power, and it was the Romans. They had peace, the Pax Romana, but it was peace through superior firepower. That's how they established their rule and their reign. And the Jewish people were looking for hope, for deliverance from this new power. That they're looking for God to help. So there's expectations on a national level when they get together for Passover, that they're looking for God's deliverance. They're looking for hope. They're looking for someone who's going to come and bring deliverance. And so that's all kind of underlying these tensions as we look to the events of Palm Sunday. So let's take a moment. We're going to look in Luke chapter 19 at a couple verses about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem at this moment. So read with me Luke 19, starting verse 28. We'll have it on the screen behind me as well. Starting 28. And when Jesus had said these things, he went on ahead, going to Jerusalem. And when he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany at the mount that is called Olivet, the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, "Go into the village in front of you, where on entering it you will find a colt, a donkey, that is tied, and on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here, and if anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say this, that the Lord has need of it." And so those who were went away, and they found it just as Jesus had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owners said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, throwing their cloaks on the colt, and they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road, and as he was drawing near already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." And Jesus answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." And it's this incredible moment as Jesus enters. There's praise, there's acclamation, saying there's a king that is coming. And Jesus, he enters from the east side of Jerusalem. I got a map of Jerusalem here. Jesus comes in, Bethphage, we're not exactly sure, but it's on the eastern side, around there, and then Bethany's a little farther out, and he is making this journey all the way up through the Mount of Olives, and then there's an entry where he will then go into the temple, which is a really important moment where Jesus confronts the authorities, but we're not going to go there today. But Jesus, he enters, and it's kind of mountainous, but he's on his way. And he comes into the city. And it's a story that you and me are really, really familiar with sometimes. And because of that, I think we lose some of the nuance. It's just familiar. We don't always think about all the important elements and the tension that's going on. So if you're really familiar with this story, I'd encourage you to just kind of sit and try to think and feel through what Jesus is walking through. Because this is a joyous moment, but it's a really challenging and hard moment, and there's a lot of tension underlying it. So, Jesus comes into the city, he sends his disciples ahead, they get the donkey, they bring it back to him, and they set Jesus on it. They set him on it, which is kind of like an enthronement. They're saying, "You're the one we're looking for." They put him on it, and they start walking in to the city. And they lay their cloaks on the donkey, and then they lay their coats on the road as he's walking up. And this is something that signals royalty. In the Old Testament, we see, like a great example is in 2 Kings 9, where Jehu, who's a king, he comes in to Jerusalem, and they would put their cloaks on the ground in front of him, saying, "Hey, this is the king. We're so excited that he's coming." Kings had welcomes like this. And so it's this royal welcome where the disciples are saying, "Jesus, we think you're the king. We think you're the one that is coming." And so there's some pretty big nationalistic, political motivations, because when they say, "Jesus, you're coming as king," they're implying that the current rulers, the current people in power are not or should not be. So Herod, who is corrupt, who wasn't really a descendant of David, morally bankrupt, they want to see a change. And to say Jesus is king is to say that Caesar is not. And so when they put him on this donkey and they bring him in, there's some incredible tension here on a political level as well. Because this is Passover. They're looking for a king who can come. And so it's not just religious activity celebrating Passover. It's about their lives here and now, saying, we need deliverance. We need help. We need someone who's a true descendant of David, a new king. So Jesus comes, and first we see that he comes as a triumphant king. We call this the triumphal entry. It's triumph. It's exciting. And Jesus doesn't deny that. In fact, he's very conscious and deliberate with what he's doing here, coming in a triumphant way. The political expectations actually are derived from some passages in the Old Testament. And one of the key ones is in Zechariah chapter 9. We're going to look at it really, really quick. In Zechariah 9, he's a prophet to the nation of Israel, and they're looking for hope. They're in a really, really hard season. And in Zechariah 9:9, he says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he. He's humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. This is a time in Israel's history where the prophets would come and they would announce that there's judgment, there's problems, there's injustice, we have to deal with it. And then there's these promises of hope, saying there's going to be a king who's going to come, who's going to set the world to rights. And here he says, your king is coming. And it's this prophecy about something that will happen farther and farther down the line. And here he says he'll come on a donkey, which is a really interesting thing, because when Jesus then says, hey, go into the town, get a donkey, that's what we're going to ride in on. That's a very deliberate action. It's a symbolic action, and he's saying that's this thing that Zechariah talked about, it's happening here now. He's saying, I am the king. I am coming as a king. So the donkey has expectations of royalty. We don't really think about that, like donkeys are donkeys. I don't know. But they had this royal expectation associated with donkeys, and Jesus is very conscious of that. Symbolic actions are really, really important. What we do conveys a lot. So I never did this, but I think about when on the last day of school, you finish your last final or your last test, and you're walking out, and you grab your backpack, or maybe you've done this, or you've seen people do this. Students, maybe a middle school student walks out, takes their backpack, finishes school, just shakes it, dumps it all in the trash. Like, I'm done. Now I don't know, probably not the best choice. I don't know. Keep your notes. But it's a symbolic action. I'm done. I can't take it anymore. I'm done. Throw it away. And it's this action. It's deliberate, and it's a symbol of something going on internally. And Jesus is saying, in a very deliberate, politically inflammatory way, I am the king that Zechariah has promised. I am the king that is coming. But it's interesting, because what do kings normally ride in on? A horse, like a big horse, a war horse. They come in a triumphant way, like leading either their captives or the people they've come delivered, brought free, the spoils of war. They come in announcing, like, I am the king. I have conquered, and I'm on my way in. And you know who's in charge. You come in on a horse. No one rides into war on a donkey. You don't do that, because donkeys are a lot smaller than horses. And so Jesus is very deliberate. He doesn't come in with that kind of mindset of kingship, but he does say, I'm a king, but I'm a different kind of king. He says, I'm coming as a humble king. A colt that symbolizes peace and humility. I will bring peace to the nations. In the prophecy in Zechariah 9, he says, this king will come and he will bring peace to all the nations, to all the world. The weapons of war will be taken apart and destroyed, and this king will come not just for the people of Israel, but for the whole world, and establish his rule. And so Jesus comes as a humble king. Humble, saying, I'm bringing peace. And it's also this moment of triumph, but it's not what people think. So it's not your royal highness. It's really your royal lowness. That's what he's coming in at, implying in a very, very overt way as to what kind of king he is. Saying, I'm ultimately, and he's talked to his disciples about this, I'm going to give my life. They're going to kill me when I go into Jerusalem, and I'm going to give my life as a ransom, as a sacrifice. It's part of why I'm here, why I'm coming. That's going to define my kingship, my kingdom, and those who follow me. Sacrificial love for other people. So this all kind of ties together. In verse 37, we have this whole group of people following Jesus, shouts of acclamation. They begin rejoicing, and they praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen. Like, they've seen Jesus do miracle after miracle. They've seen him do incredible things, casting out demons, healing people who have been sick for incredible amounts of time. And they say, man, this guy, he's the king. Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven, glory in the highest. And this song, it's actually from Psalm 118. It's a quotation of Psalm 118. And Psalms 113 to 118 are called the Hallel. And these 5 or 6 psalms were sung especially at the time of Passover. When they're journeying to Jerusalem, they're probably the songs that Jesus sang with his disciples, the Passover meal. That night it says they sang. And it's these songs of praise and hope for deliverance, that God would be faithful and that he would bring this new hope into the hardship, into the circumstances they're in. And so these songs, they were songs that you sang at a special occasion. Songs that you would sing at a moment of celebration, as a moment of triumph, as a moment of hope, as a prayer. It was a song for a very specific moment. And you and me do this, right? We sing happy birthday on your birthday. I hope someone sang happy birthday for you on your birthday. Or we sing things like the national anthem at the beginning of the Cardinal season or any baseball game. You know, we have special songs for special moments. I'm sure someone somewhere has, like, I don't know why, but Justin Bieber songs are your thing. At a special moment of celebration, you need the Bieber song. No judgment. A little bit of judgment. A little bit of judgment. I mean, to be honest, in a moment of transparency, for me, special moments of celebration are Taylor Swift moments. I don't know. Listen to Taylor Swift. Don't judge me. You can judge me. It's fine. Bring it on. Bring it on. We have songs that we go to commemorate special occasions. And so when in this moment they start singing Psalm 118, saying, "Blessed is the King who's coming," they're saying, we have a king. And it's not Herod. And Caesar's not king either. And this is like inflammatory stuff to say. It's an awesome moment. They're praising him, praising God. But there's people who are not excited about this. When you sing these things, the revolutionary leaders that came, there's a lot of them actually, when you look at the first century, they died. The Romans put down these sort of leaders. And so this is actually kind of a dangerous thing. So when Jesus, for the joy set before him, this is a joyous moment, but there's tension. It's kind of somber. I think internally for Jesus, because there's conflict that is coming. And that's why we see things like a little bit later at the end of our passage in verse 39 where the Pharisees come to Jesus. They're on the way and the Pharisees say, "Hey, Jesus, teacher, tell your disciples to be quiet. Rebuke them. Like, tell them to stop because this is not good." And they're not happy because this is threatening their position, right? They're well respected. They like their authority. They like their prominence. They don't want to have a revolt on their hands. They don't want Rome to come in and really put their foot down on a revolution or on people. They don't want to draw attention to that because it threatens not just, they just don't want national unrest, but it's kind of personal for them. They don't want to lose their personal position. So Jesus says, though, "I am coming and I am the king." He's very deliberate with what he does. And Jesus' response, it's amazing. He says, if they were silent, the stones themselves would cry out. Creation itself knows that I'm coming and that I am the king. And essentially he's saying, they're right to praise me as king. They're right. I am claiming this. And he's saying, I claim to be not just a triumphant king, a humble king, but the true king. He doesn't deny it. And we see that all through the events of Jesus' last week, where they say, hey, they say you're a king. It's like, you have said so. He's very conscious with what he says. But his kingship, it doesn't fit their preconceived categories of what they want the king to be. They don't like it. He doesn't fit who they think he should be. And Jesus knew this, right? Because he knows at this moment that these crowds who are cheering for him, these disciples who are cheering for him, in just a week, less than a week, they're going to be cheering for his death. They're going to be cheering for his crucifixion. This is a moment they want a king, but he ends up not fitting their model of what a king should be, and they don't like it. And they turn on him really, really quickly. So Jesus, for the joy set before him, he knows these people are going to call for his death. He knows those who are his closest followers, his disciples, they're going to abandon him. One of them is going to betray him for not a lot of money, they're going to turn on him. So it's this moment of triumph. It's an incredible moment of praise, but Jesus knows that there's something deeper going on and that it's going to be a really hard journey. But I love it. He's very intentional with his mission here. I think he has a deeper joy knowing that he's going to accomplish a redemptive work that's not just going to be on a nationalistic level, but it's going to be on an international level, on a cosmic level, that all the brokenness in this world he is going to address in a really incredible way. And it's going to be a moment of greatest defeat that people are going to think, that paradoxically is actually going to be an incredible moment of victory and showing who God is. And that is why Jesus has humble, triumphant entry, saying, God will bring deliverance here, and I am the king, but it's much bigger than you guys think. Much, much bigger. So, as we think about Palm Sunday, I want to apply this in just a few ways for us. Some of us, as I read this story, I kind of think about what is people's response to Jesus. He's claiming to be a king, but what do we think about that, right? How does that connect with our lives, with your lives? And really, even in Jesus' day, what are the kind of responses that he gets? So, first I want to ask the question, are we like the cheering crowd? Are we like the people who are cheering for Jesus as he is coming in? Because the crowd, they're excited, they understand what Jesus is doing, and they're looking for hope, but they also, I think they have a limited understanding of who Jesus is, and they have a limited understanding of what their problems are. They want Jesus to come in and address their present circumstances. We need to kick Rome out. We need to overthrow the corrupt leaders. And Jesus does do some of this judgment work in the temple when he turns it over, but they're looking for Jesus to come as a king and to be their kind of king, to be who they want. And Jesus understands that, but he doesn't turn out to be who they expected, and they have a limited understanding of what their deep, true needs are. When I think about the problems that you and me face and the things that we seek for prayer for and struggle through, maybe your job is really terrible. Maybe you really hate your job, or you're struggling in your family, your kids are making bad decisions, or you're struggling in your marriage, or financially, you're like, man, we can't make it, I need help. Or maybe you're just anxious at this point in the school year, you're struggling with your tests and finishing things up. And we want God to help our present circumstances now. And that's a good thing, right? We should go to God and ask for help now, and I think he will enter into our present circumstances. But our understanding of our needs are often so limited. We put Jesus in a pretty small box of what we want him to do and the kind of deliverance we want him to bring. And ultimately, I think that's why the crowds, they're cheering at this moment, they get it, but within a week they don't get it. He doesn't do the deliverance that they want. They have a narrower picture of what they want God to do in this world. And Jesus, in his entering into this, is setting to rights something that is far deeper than they think. God cares about our present circumstances, but there's something much bigger, a reality of much deeper problems. They're thinking about the oppression of Rome or the corrupt leadership, and they want God to deliver them from that, which is good. They should pray and hope for deliverance. But Jesus, in his death on the cross, is saying there's actually a deeper need. There's a deeper underlying problem to the exploitation and the oppression, and it's this reality of separation between human beings and God. This thing we call sin. It's this issue of rebellion, that human beings decide to do things their own way, and that is actually at the source, at the root of all of this brokenness and evil and pain and suffering. It's human beings with a spiritual darkness, a spiritual need, that is what is driving the circumstances. So he's saying there's a deeper problem than just looking for a political solution or a social solution. There's a spiritual element that is at the root of this, and we need to address it, because ultimately it's the power of death, the power of sin, of brokenness in this world and in our lives that is underlying all of the problems we have. And Jesus wants to address something, a diagnosis that is more dire than we realized, and something that the solution requires something far more radical than we realize, that the problem is much deeper. So when we think about Jesus coming as a king, we like to think about Jesus as a savior, but sometimes it's harder to think about him as Lord. We like the idea of him saving us from stuff. But there is this deeper idea of kingship, of rule and reign that he is bringing. And it's not just going to impact our present circumstances, but there is a eternal aspect of what he is doing, and bringing it here and now, but something that's going to have a profound impact for the rest of history. So Jesus' rescue mission is much deeper than we think. And the crowds, I think they get disappointed when Jesus doesn't turn out to be all that they think he is. And you and me, sometimes we get disappointed when God doesn't turn out to be who we think he is or should be and what he should be doing. And God does care about our circumstances, but God is often doing something that's much higher and bigger than we realize. And it's far more complex than we look for short-sighted solutions. And he's going for something much deeper and bigger. And so, sometimes I think you and me were like the cheering crowd. We like cheering for Jesus, but there's eventually a moment when we get dissatisfied and we lose sight of him. And I just want to say God is doing something much bigger. And he knows what he's doing, and he is at work to bring redemption on a cosmic level, not just on our present circumstantial moments. So it's big. Sometimes, though, we're also more like the grumbling Pharisees here in this story, and we see this a lot through the Gospels, where Jesus has a lot of run-ins with them. And the Pharisees, they didn't really ultimately want God to be in charge. They didn't like this claim that Jesus was making to be king, to be Lord, because it threatened them. They were the religious establishment. They liked their position, and they said, Jesus, don't tell me how to live my life. You're gonna draw the Roman fire down on us. We don't like that. We don't want to revolt on our hands. We like our kind of cozy position. And they're saying, no, Jesus, we don't want you to be king and tell us what's right and wrong. We want to determine that for ourselves. And you and me, sometimes we also land in that position where we don't like to be told what to do. We don't like having our power threatened, or we find our worth and our value in our position. And God says, I'm bigger than that. And I want to transform your position. I want to transform your power and strength and what you do to make a meaningful impact. But we often don't like it. I think all of us to some degree struggle with this, right? This idea of, God, don't tell me what to do. That's kind of at the root of sin. It's at the heart of this brokenness of rebelling against God. So it's this posture to God. Don't tell me what to do. But deep down, you and me, when we do things on our own strength and our own power, it only gets us so far. And maybe we push and we have a successful life and we make money and career or whatever, and we can leave things for other people, but eventually we're going to die. Eventually, someone down the line is going to waste the money, or the present impact you have will be forgotten. We don't like to be told what to do, but ultimately, the deepest problems that we have, we're all going to die. At some point, it's going to fall apart. Like, we can't save ourselves. And Jesus is saying, as I'm coming as a king, there's a redemptive work that I want to do here. And it's in moments when we finally come to realize I can't do it on my own, that God can bring some incredible transformation. So as we think about Jesus, for the joy set before him enduring the cross, he sees these people, some who are actively opposing him, some who are cheering him on, but he knows they'll let him down. And Jesus knows in spite of that, whether they're his enemies or whether they're his friends, he's going to love them. He's going to sacrifice for them. He has a joy that supersedes the circumstances. I'm sure he was excited as he was riding into Jerusalem, but he was somber. He was solemn. He knew that this was going to be incredibly challenging, and that these people would reject him. So Jesus, as he he comes, he comes as a triumphant king, but he's going to triumph over something much bigger. And he comes as a humble king, saying, I'm going to give my life. I'm not going to use power to exploit people. But I am the true king. I am the one who is going to set the world to rights. I am the one who's going to deal with evil in a full and complete way. And I'm going to bring deliverance that people need. And it's going to be not just deliverance from the Romans, but over death itself. And so that's the rescue mission Jesus is on. That's why each of the gospel accounts, the last week of his life gets an inordinate amount of the gospel time, of these moments leading up to Jesus' death. It's incredible. And I wish we could spend more time at all the other stuff that happens here. But I just want us to focus on this idea of Jesus coming as the king, as a triumphant king, but he's humble, but he's also the world's true king, and that he is claiming that as he is coming. And that, I think, is the joy set before him, that he, as Hebrews said, he's sitting at the right hand of God. He's bringing his rule and reign into our lives, but I don't want us to miss his claims, his work, because I think it's going to be our source for moving forward through incredible challenges in life, for the moments that are ups and downs. I think God, through these sort of challenges we go through in life, he can bring a redemptive work that is far bigger than anything we imagine. And when we think about Jesus going through the suffering that he goes through, there's a joy he holds on to, knowing that there's redemption, restoring you and me to him, to each other, and restoration of the whole world. And that's his redemptive work. And there'll be a day when Jesus comes not just as the humble king, but as the king who will bring justice, who will deal with all the wrongs. He will make it right in a full, complete way. But here, in Jesus' coming and his death and resurrection, there's a way that starts here and now, and that you and me can experience here and now a new creation work of God making things new in our lives. And so that's what we want to talk about as we move into Good Friday and think about these events of what Jesus has done in order to make a way for us to become right with God. So let's pray and take a moment to just think about who God is and who Jesus is and what it means for us today.